The evening mist rolled thick through Nocturne Vale Cemetery like a living thing, curling around ancient headstones and skeletal iron hooks that held swaying red lanterns. The air tasted of frost and old earth. Everything was silent except for the distant cry of ravens circling the Gothic spires barely visible through the fog. Alara Voss knelt alone before a towering stone crypt, her threadbare coat pulled tight against the cold. Her blonde hair, windswept and tangled, fell across her face as she hunched over the massive tomb. The structure was grand, carved with symbols she couldn't read, encrusted with age, yet it felt achingly familiar, like a half-remembered dream. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. Her canvas tote bag, frayed at the edges, lay abandoned beside her. A children's board book peeked from the top, its corner bent. In her arms, wrapped in layers of worn blankets, her daughter Talia slept fitfully, small fingers clutching her mother's sleeve. Alara's hands trembled as she brushed dead leaves from the base of the crypt. She did it carefully, tenderly, as if tending to someone she'd known her entire life. Tears streaked her cheeks, and she whispered something too soft to hear, an apology, perhaps, or a confession. Behind her, footsteps echoed across the stone path. Deliberate, unhurried. A tall figure emerged from the fog, his black coat embroidered with silver thread that caught the lantern light. His hair, long and moonlight pale, spilled over his shoulders. In one hand, he carried white flowers, night-blooming jasmine, their petals ghostly in the dim light. He stopped just behind her, red eyes gleaming in the dusk. When he spoke, his voice was low and cold enough to make the wind die. "That is my queen's tomb," he said. "Who are you?" Alara gasped, her head snapping around. Her eyes went wide with shock, and she instinctively pulled Talia closer. For a moment, she just stared at him, at the impossible height of him, the unnatural stillness, the way the fog seemed to bend around him like a living cloak. She scrambled partway to her feet, nearly dropping her bag. I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone. I wasn't trying to," her voice caught. "I didn't mean to intrude." The man, Lord Caliph Draven, though she didn't yet know his name, didn't step closer. He simply stood there, flowers in hand, his expression unreadable. But something flickered in his crimson gaze. Not anger. Something older. Something like recognition. "I'm not accusing you of trespassing," he said, his tone softening just slightly. "I want to understand why you're here. Why you're crying at her grave." Alara froze, her breath misting in the cold air. Talia stirred in her arms, tiny fingers reaching toward the stranger. The child whispered something in her sleep, words that made no sense. "Cold crown." Caliph's eyes widened, just for a heartbeat. Then his expression hardened again, his jaw tightening. Alara looked down at the crypt, then back at the strange man, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know why I'm here. I had to be." She slowly sank back down to her knees, adjusting Talia in her arms. The child settled, her small hand still outstretched toward Caliph. "I've been dreaming about this place since I was 7 years old," Alara said, her voice distant, like she was speaking from somewhere far away. "I've never been to this cemetery before today, but I knew exactly where to find this tomb. I knew the path. I knew the statues. I knew the lanterns would be red." Caliph said nothing. The flowers in his hand trembled slightly. Alara's eyes stayed fixed on the carved stone. "I don't know who's buried here, but every night for as long as I can remember, I've dreamed of her. A woman with dark hair and kind eyes. She's always calling me home." Her voice cracked. "And when I found this grave today, I felt like I'd finally come back to someone I'd lost. Someone I'd been mourning my entire life." The silence between them was thick, heavy with something neither of them could name. The fog thickened. The lanterns swayed. Caliph stared at the young woman kneeling before his queen's tomb, at her worn coat, her sleeping child, her tear-streaked face. And he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 centuries.
Fear.
Because she had just described Seraphine's face. A face no portrait captured. A face only he remembered. He moved forward slowly, kneeling beside her. His voice, when he spoke, was barely audible.
"Tell me," he said.
"In your dreams, does she ever sing?" Alara's breath hitched. She looked at him, eyes brimming with fresh tears. And then, softly, she began to hum a melody. A lullaby. Ancient. Haunting. One only 2 people in all the world had ever known. Caliph closed his eyes. And in that moment, beneath the red lanterns and the watchful stone guardians, between a grieving king and a lost young mother, something impossible began to unravel. There was a story buried here, one written in shattered souls and ancient prophecies, one neither of them understood yet, but it was about to consume them both. Alara didn't know how long they stayed there, kneeling in the fog. But when Caliph finally spoke again, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "You need to tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning. When did the dream start?" And so, with Talia sleeping between them and the mist closing in like a shroud, Alara began. "I was 7 years old. The attic room was barely large enough for a bed. Alara climbed the narrow staircase carefully, Talia's weight familiar against her shoulder, her canvas bag bumping against the peeling wallpaper. The landlady had gone to bed hours ago, leaving only the dim glow of a single bulb in the hallway below. She pushed open the door with her hip. The room greeted her with its usual cold silence, a slanted ceiling, a window that rattled in its frame, and a mattress on the floor covered with every blanket she owned. A hot plate sat on an upturned crate. Her kitchen. Alara lowered Talia onto the makeshift bed, tucking the blankets around her small body. The child murmured something in her sleep, one hand reaching out as if searching for something just beyond her grasp. Cold crown. Alara's hands still. Those words. Talia had whispered to them in the cemetery, reaching toward the vampire king like she recognized him. But that was impossible. They'd never met him before tonight, hadn't they? Alara sank onto the edge of the mattress, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. She should sleep. It was past midnight. She had a shift at the diner tomorrow morning. Today, technically, and Talia would wake before dawn as always. But her mind wouldn't quiet. She stared at the water-stained ceiling, watching shadows dance across the plaster. And as her eyes began to close, the dreams returned. The woman stood in the moonlight, her dark hair flowing like ink in water. Her gown was white, threaded with silver, and her face was kind but unbearably sad. "You must find the stone," she whispered, her voice echoing as if from underwater. "Before they do. Before it's too late. Who are you?" Alara tried to ask, but no sound came out. The woman reached for her, fingers brushing Alara's cheek. The touch was cold but gentle. "You already know," she said. "You've always known." Then the dream shattered like glass, and Alara was falling. She jerked awake, heart pounding. The room was dark. Talia slept peacefully beside her. But Alara's cheeks were wet with tears. She didn't remember crying. She'd been having these dreams since she was 7 years old. She remembered the first one clearly. An autumn night, rain drumming against the foster home's windows. She'd woken screaming about a woman burning, a throne crumbling, white light tearing through darkness. The social worker had called it a trauma response. Processing her parents' abandonment, they'd said. But Alara knew better. Even then, she knew these weren't her memories. They belonged to someone else. By age 10, she'd stopped telling people about the dreams. The other kids already called her strange. Too quiet. Too distant. Like she was only half present. Because that's exactly how she felt. half missing. Like a vital part of her existed somewhere else, somewhere she couldn't reach, but desperately needed to find. At 15, she'd started drawing the woman's face, sketch after sketch, trying to capture the curve of her smile, the sorrow in her eyes. She'd filled 3 notebooks before her foster mother found them and threw them away. Obsession isn't healthy, the woman had said. But it wasn't an obsession. It was remembering. Alara pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Tonight, she'd finally found the tomb. The stone the woman had been urging her toward all these years. And she'd met him. The vampire king with eyes like burning coals and a voice that could command death itself. He looked at her like she was a ghost. Like she'd crawled out of his worst nightmare. In your dreams, does she ever sing?
Yes, she did.
A lullaby Alara had hummed without thinking, one she'd never heard anywhere else. A lullaby only the king had recognized. Alara pressed her palms against her eyes. None of this made sense. She was nobody, a broke single mother living in an attic, working double shifts to afford diapers and rent. She had no connection to vampire royalty or ancient queens or crypts in fog-drenched graveyards. But the dreams didn't lie. And tonight, for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and knew. Across the city, in a palace of black glass and moonlit spires, Caliph Draven stood before a wall of ancient texts. His private study was carved from obsidian, lit by floating orbs of pale fire. Shelves stretched from floor to vaulted ceiling, packed with volumes bound in leather, metal, and materials that predated written language. He'd been searching for 3 hours. His fingers traced the spine of a blood-red tome, one of Seraphine's journals. He hadn't opened it in 2 centuries.
Couldn't bear to.
But tonight, he needed answers. He pulled it from the shelf, dust cascading like ash. The cover fell open, revealing Seraphine's elegant script. Caliph worries I spend too much time in the catacombs. But the old magic calls to me. It whispers of soul binding, of fractured essences, of ways to cheat death itself.
His jaw tightened.
She'd been researching forbidden magic before her death. He'd known that. But he'd never understood why. Until tonight. The memories surfaced unbidden. Seraphine's final moments. The shadow quartz ambush. Blades meant for him. Redirected by her body. And then the flash. Blinding white light erupting from her chest as she fell, her scream splitting the air. He'd caught her, but it was already too late. Her body had gone cold in his arms. But in that moment, in that terrible flash of light, he'd felt her soul shatter. Not fade. Not pass beyond.
Shatter.
Like glass breaking into 1,000 pieces. He'd thought it was trauma, his mind fracturing under the weight of loss. But tonight, kneeling before Seraphine's tomb, he'd felt it again. That same essence. That same warmth. Fractured, incomplete, but undeniably hers. Caliph closed the journal, his hands trembling. Alara Voss. A human woman living in poverty, with no knowledge of vampire politics or ancient history. Yet she carried Seraphine's sorrow in her eyes, hummed Seraphine's lullaby, and was drawn to Seraphine's grave like a moth to flame. And her child, Cold Crown. No human child should be able to sense his nature. Yet Talia had reached for him instinctively, recognizing something she had no right to know. Caliph moved to the window, gazing out over the dark city. Nocturne Vale stretched below him, a labyrinth of spires and shadow. He raised one hand, and the darkness answered. Shadows peeled from the walls, coalescing into vaguely humanoid shapes, his watchers, extensions of his will. Silent, invisible to mortal eyes. Find the woman, he commanded. Alara Voss. Watch her. Protect her. The shadows bowed and dissolved into mist, slipping through the window like smoke. Caliph turned back to the journal, conflict warring in his chest. If Alara truly carried a fragment of Seraphine's soul, the Shadow Court would hunt her the moment they sensed it. They destroyed his queen once. They wouldn't hesitate to finish what they'd started. But if he brought Alara into his world, he'd be inviting chaos. Resurrection magic was forbidden for a reason. And if Seraphine had deliberately shattered her own soul,
Why?
what curse had she been trying to break? What had she sacrificed herself to prevent? Calith's fingers curled into fists. He'd failed Seraphine once. He wouldn't fail her again. Even if it meant protecting the echo of her, fractured and incomplete, living in a stranger's body. Even if it destroyed him in the process. 3 nights passed before Alara returned to the cemetery. She told herself she wouldn't go back. That it was dangerous, foolish, that she had Talia to think about. But the pull was relentless, a hook lodged deep in her chest, tugging her toward Nocturne Vale with every breath. The dreams had grown worse. More vivid. More desperate. Find the stone. Before they do. So on the 3rd night, after her shift ended and she'd left Talia with the landlady's teenage daughter, Alara found herself walking the fog-shrouded path through the graveyard gates. The red lanterns swayed in the wind, casting their bloody light across the stones. Ravens watched from the iron fence, silent as sentinels. Everything felt heavier here, like the air itself carried the weight of centuries. She made her way to the grand crypt, her worn boots crunching on gravel, and stopped. He was already there. Lord Calith Draven stood before his queen's tomb, hands clasped behind his back, his silver hair gleaming in the lantern light. He didn't turn when she approached, but his voice cut through the silence like a blade. I wondered how long you would stay away. Alara's breath caught. I shouldn't have come back. No, he agreed, finally turning to face her. His red eyes were colder than she remembered, calculating, distant. You shouldn't have. Yet here you are. She took a hesitant step closer. I needed to understand. Understand what? His tone was sharp. Why do you dream of a woman dead 3 centuries? Why does her grave call to you like a lodestone? He moved toward her, each step deliberate. I've spent 3 days researching you, Alara Voss. You're no one. A diner waitress. No magical lineage. No connection to vampire society. Yet you hummed a melody only she knew. Alara's hands trembled. I don't know why. I've always known it. Sing it, he commanded.
Now.
All of it. Sing it. The words came unbidden, flowing from her lips like water from a spring. She didn't know where they came from, didn't understand the language. Ancient, lyrical, nothing like any tongue spoken in modern times.
But she sang.
Noctis Vale, Luna's light, guard the soul through endless night. When the crown and throne divide, let the shattered heart abide. Sleep, my love, till dawn returns, where the silver star fire burns. Her voice faded into the fog. Calith stood frozen, his face drained of color. His hands shook before he clenched them into fists. That's impossible, he whispered. No one, his voice broke. I never wrote it down. Never taught it to another soul. Seraphine sang that lullaby only to me, in the privacy of our chambers. There is no way you could know those words. Alara's eyes filled with tears. I don't understand any of this. Please, just tell me what's happening to me. Calith closed the distance between them in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders. His touch was cold, but not cruel. Desperate. You carry a fragment of her, he said, his voice raw. A shard of Queen Seraphine's soul. When she died, her essence didn't pass beyond. It fractured, scattered. And somehow, in some impossible way, a piece of her found its way into you. Alara shook her head violently. That's insane. I can't be. You dream of her memories. You sing her songs. You're drawn to her grave like you're trying to come home. His grip tightened. You are not Seraphine reborn. You are part of her. The piece she left behind.
No.
Alara pulled away, stumbling backward. I'm just me. I'm nobody. You stopped being nobody the moment you knelt before this tomb, Calith said coldly. And now, every creature who once served the Shadow Court, the ones who murdered my queen, will sense what you are. They'll come for you, Ilara. They'll come to finish what they started. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to save you. Ilara turned and ran. She made it halfway down the winding cemetery path before she felt it. A coldness that had nothing to do with the night air. A pressure building behind her, thick and suffocating, like the air before a storm. The lanterns flickered.
Went dark.
Ilara's steps faltered. She spun around, heart hammering. The fog had thickened into something solid, a mass of churning shadow, darker than the night itself. It took form slowly, grotesquely. Elongated limbs, a faceless head, claws that dripped with black ichor. A shadow wraith. Its voice was a rasp of wind through dead trees. Seraphine's echo must die. Ilara screamed. She ran, but the creature was faster. It lunged, claws extended,
And stopped.
a figure stood between them, silver hair whipping in an unnatural wind. Caliph raised one hand, and the shadows answered his call. They erupted from the ground like living chains, wrapping around the wraith, constricting, burning with crimson light. The creature shrieked, a sound that split the air and sent ravens scattering from the trees. "You dare," Caliph growled, his voice resonating with ancient power, "hunt what is mine to protect." He closed his fist. The wraith imploded, collapsing into itself with a final, agonized wail. Black mist scattered on the wind, dissolving into nothing. Silence fell. Caliph turned to Ilara, his red eyes blazing in the darkness. Blood, not his own, streaked his coat. He looked every inch the predator he was. "Do you believe me now?" he asked quietly. Ilara's legs gave out. She sank to her knees on the gravel path, shaking uncontrollably. Caliph knelt before her, his expression softening just slightly. "The Shadow Court knows you exist. They'll send more, stronger ones. And I cannot be everywhere at once. What do I do?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "You come with me." He offered his hand, pale, elegant, deadly. "To the citadel of Nocturne Vale, where I can keep you and your daughter safe behind wards older than the city. I don't even know you. You know me better than you think," he said. "You've been dreaming of me too, haven't you? A king on a throne. A man mourning in the dark." Ilara's breath hitched.
Yes.
She had. "If they seek you, I cannot allow you to remain unguarded," Caliph continued, his tone brooking no argument. "You can stay in your attic room and wait for the next attack, when I might not arrive in time to stop. Or you can trust that I have no desire to see Seraphine's soul destroyed a second time." He stood, hands still extended. "Choose quickly. They're already coming." Ilara looked up at him, at this impossible, terrifying, beautiful creature who'd just saved her life. At the vampire king who'd loved a queen so deeply, he'd mourned her for 300 years. And she took his hand. The moment their fingers touched, warmth flooded through her, and with it, a flash of memory that wasn't hers. A throne room. Moonlight through stained glass. Calipha's arms around her, his voice soft in her ear. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Ilara gasped. Calipha's eyes widened, clearly feeling it too. "Come," he said roughly, pulling her to her feet. "We don't have much time." And as shadows began to gather at the cemetery gates, dozens of them, circling like wolves, Caliph swept his coat around Ilara's shoulders and led her into the darkness. Toward the obsidian palace. Toward answers. Toward a destiny neither of them could escape. The citadel of Nocturne Vale rose from the cliffs like a crown of black glass and stone. Ilara clutched Talia tighter as Caliph's carriage, if it could be called that. It seemed to move without horses, climbed the winding road. Spires pierced the night sky, their peaks lost in clouds. Windows glowed with pale blue light, and everywhere, ravens perched and watched. "It's a fortress," Caliph said, breaking the heavy silence. "Built during the First Blood Wars. No shadow magic can penetrate its walls without my knowledge." Alara nodded mutely, too overwhelmed to speak. They'd stopped at her attic room only long enough to grab their few belongings, clothes, Talia's toys, the small wooden box containing Alara's drawings. The landlady had asked no questions when she saw Caliph standing in the doorway, his presence filling the narrow hallway like a cold wind. Now Talia stirred against Alara's chest, blinking sleepily. "Mama? Where are we?" "Somewhere safe," Alara whispered, hoping it was true. The carriage stopped before massive iron gates wrought with symbols that seemed to move in the torchlight. They swung open silently, and the carriage rolled into a courtyard paved with black stone that reflected the moon like still water. Caliph stepped out first, then offered his hand to help Alara down. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. The interior of the citadel stole her breath. The entrance hall soared 3 stories high, its walls carved from pure obsidian that caught and refracted the light from floating orbs of pale fire. A grand staircase split in 2 directions, its banisters wrought from silver that gleamed like moonlight. Tapestries hung between towering columns, scenes of battles, coronations, and figures Alara didn't recognize.
Except one.
Her eyes fixed on a portrait dominating the far wall, a woman in white and silver, dark hair cascading over her shoulders, eyes kind but infinitely sad. Queen Seraphine. Alara's legs weakened. The woman from her dreams, rendered in oil and gold leaf, staring down at her from across 3 centuries. "Mama, look." Talia squirmed free, running ahead into the hall. "It's pretty." Talia, wait. But the child was already spinning in circles, her laughter echoing off the vaulted ceiling. And then she began to hum, that same melody Alara had sung at the grave. The palace responded. Light flared along the columns, racing up the walls in veins of silver and blue. Dormant wards awakened, sigils appearing in the air like frost spreading across glass. The temperature dropped, and Alara could have sworn she heard voices, whispers of welcome in a language she didn't understand. Caliph froze, his eyes widening. "That's impossible. Those wards haven't activated since Seraphine died." Talia giggled, reaching up to touch one of the glowing symbols. It pulsed under her fingertips like a heartbeat. A door opened on the upper landing, and figures emerged. Vampires, Alara realized with a chill. Tall, pale, impossibly beautiful, and uniformly deadly. They descended the stairs with predatory grace, their eyes fixed on the small human child awakening ancient magic. Caliph moved to stand between them and Talia, his posture protective. "Stand down. She is under my protection." A woman in crimson robes reached the bottom first, her silver hair braided with rubies. Her gaze swept over Alara, with barely concealed disdain. "My lord, explain to us why a human child can activate Queen Seraphine's personal wards." Words keyed to her bloodline alone. "Lady Morgan," Caliph said coldly, "I don't answer to my council. I will inform them." Another figure stepped forward, a man with black hair and golden eyes, younger looking but radiating power. "Caliph, the entire court is whispering. They say Seraphine has returned, that you've brought her back through forbidden magic." "Lord Varen," Caliph acknowledged. "Let them whisper. The truth is more complicated than resurrection." "Then explain it," Morgan demanded. "Because from where we stand, you've brought an unknown human and her child into the heart of our stronghold, and that child is activating magic that should be extinct." Alara scooped Talia into her arms, backing toward the door. "I shouldn't be here. This was a mistake." "You cannot leave," another voice spoke, an elderly vampire leaning heavily on a cane, his eyes clouded but his voice sharp. "The Shadow Court already hunts you. You'd be dead before dawn." "Counselor Aldrich speaks the truth," Caliph said. He turned to face his assembled court, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Alara Voss carries a fragment of Queen Seraphine's soul. Her daughter appears to carry another. They are not full reincarnations. They are pieces of what was shattered during Seraphine's death. And the Shadow Court will stop at nothing to destroy those pieces before they can reform. Silence fell like a blade. Then chaos erupted. Impossible. Soul fragmentation is a myth. If she truly carries the Queen's essence, we could use her to. She's a weapon waiting to be claimed. Enough. Kalitha's voice boomed through the hall, resonating with compulsion. Every vampire fell silent. Elara and her child will reside in the East Wing, in chambers adjacent to my own. They will be accorded the same protection and respect as any member of this court. Anyone who threatens them answers to me. Personally. Morrigan's lip curled. You would risk civil war over a human? I would risk annihilation itself before I allow Seraphine's soul to be destroyed again. His red eyes blazed. Are we clear? One by one, the vampires bowed, some reluctant, some merely resigned. All except Varen, who studied Elara with unsettling intensity. Welcome to the Citadel, Miss Voss, he said softly. I hope you survive it. Caliph led them through winding corridors lit by blood-red sconces, past silent servants who pressed themselves against the walls and averted their eyes. Portraits lined every hall, and in each one, Seraphine's face appeared. Young, old, laughing, solemn, always watching. Elara felt like she was drowning. Finally, Caliph stopped before an ornate door carved with roses and thorns. Your chambers, he said, pushing it open. The room beyond was larger than her entire attic. A four-poster bed draped in midnight blue silk dominated one wall. A fireplace crackled with silver flames. Windows overlooked the city, its lights twinkling like fallen stars. Talia gasped in delight, immediately running to explore. Elara remained in the doorway. Why did she die? She asked quietly. Caliph stiffened. You said the Shadow Court murdered her. But you haven't said why. What was she to you? Just a queen? Or something more? That, Caliph said, his voice suddenly distant, is not a conversation for tonight. Then when he turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw past the cold immortal mask to the man beneath, someone drowning in grief so old it had calcified into ice. When I can speak her name without feeling my heart break again, he said softly. When I can look at you without seeing her ghost. When I can be certain you're ready to hear how I failed her. He stepped back into the corridor. Rest. Tomorrow, we begin unraveling what Seraphine did, and why she believed fracturing her own soul was the only way to save us all. The door closed, leaving Elara alone with her daughter in a palace of shadows and secrets. And somewhere deep in the stone, Elara could have sworn she heard a woman's voice whispering, "Welcome home." Elara woke to moonlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of a knock at her door. She sat up slowly, disoriented. The silk sheets, the silver fireplace, the towering room. For a moment, she'd forgotten where she was. Then memory crashed back. The Citadel, the vampires, Kalitha's court whispering about her like she was a ghost made flesh. Talia slept peacefully beside her, curled into the pillows like she'd always belonged in a palace. Another knock, soft but insistent. Elara wrapped herself in the robe she'd found draped over a chair, far too fine for someone like her, and opened the door. Caliph stood in the corridor, dressed in black as always, his silver hair tied back. But something in his expression had changed. The coldness had thawed, just slightly, replaced by something almost hesitant. I need to show you something, he said. Tonight. It can't wait. It's the middle of the night. Please. The words seemed to cost him. There are answers in Seraphine's tomb. Answers I should have searched for centuries ago. Elara glanced back at Talia. I can't leave her. She'll be safe. I've stationed my most trusted guards outside your door. He paused. I give you my word, my blood oath, that no harm will come to her while she sleeps. Something in his voice made Elara believe him. She nodded. Let me get dressed. They traveled in silence through the sleeping palace, down spiraling staircases that descended into the mountain itself. The air grew colder with each step, and Alara realized they were heading to catacombs carved deep beneath the citadel. Seraphine's tomb isn't in the cemetery, she asked. That crypt holds her memorial, Caliph said, his voice echoing off stone walls. But her true resting place is here, where only I can reach her. They emerged into a vast underground chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stood a tomb carved from white marble that seemed to glow with inner light. Symbols covered every surface, the same ancient script Alara had seen on the cemetery crypt. But these were different. They pulsed, like a heartbeat frozen in stone. I've never been able to open the inner chamber, Caliph said, approaching the tomb. The wards only responded to Seraphine's touch. After she died, they went dormant. He turned to Alara. But if you carry part of her soul... Alara's hand trembled as she reached toward the marble. The moment her fingers made contact, the tomb exploded with light. Runes blazed to life, racing across the stone in rivers of silver and gold. The symbols spiraled upward, forming patterns in the air, and the tomb's face split down the center with a grinding of ancient mechanisms. A doorway opened, revealing stairs descending into darkness. Caliph stared, stunned. 300 years, he whispered. 300 years I've stood before this tomb, and it never once answered me. Alara stepped toward the opening, because she wanted someone else to find this. Someone who carried her memories but wasn't you. She descended. The hidden chamber was small, circular, its walls covered entirely in glowing script. At its center stood a pedestal, and hovering above it, suspended in crystallized light, was a single white rose, perfectly preserved, its petals still soft. Alara approached slowly, drawn forward by a pull she couldn't resist. The moment she entered the circle of light, the runes ignited. Words formed in the air, written in fire and starlight, in a language Alara suddenly understood. When the queen's heart divides, the realm shall know her twice. One to bear the crown of sorrow, one to carry hope's tomorrow. The king who mourns must choose his path, protect the living or wake the past. For in division lies salvation, and in sacrifice, restoration. Alara's breath caught. She knew what would happen to her. Caliph stood frozen in the doorway, his face drained of color. This was deliberate. She chose to fracture her soul. More visions flooded Alara's mind, no longer fragments, but complete memories. Seraphine in a dark ritual chamber, ancient texts spread before her. Blood on her hands. Tears streamed down her face. The curse will consume him, she whispered to someone Alara couldn't see. Unless I divide what we share. Unless I break the bond that ties our souls together. It will kill you, the unseen voice warned.
No.
Seraphine's smile was heartbreaking. It will scatter me. And someday, somewhere, the pieces will find their way back. Not to reclaim what was lost, but to finish what I started. She looked directly at Alara. No, through time itself, at the woman who would one day carry her memories.
Save him, she said.
When the shadows come, save him the way I couldn't. Alara gasped, stumbling backward. Caliph caught her before she fell. What did you see? He demanded. A curse, Alara whispered. You were dying. Something was draining your immortality, turning you to ash from the inside. The Shadow Court, they'd poisoned you with dark magic. Seraphine knew the only way to break it was to sever the soul bond between you. So she used forbidden magic to shatter herself, scattering the pieces so the curse couldn't follow the connection. Calitha's grip on her arms tightened. I never knew. She told me she'd found a cure, that she'd stopped the poison. And then 3 days later, they ambushed us. It wasn't an ambush, Alara said, understanding flooding through her. It was an assassination. The Shadow Court knew what she'd done. They killed her before the scattered pieces could reunite and undo their curse. But if the pieces are reforming now, Calitha's eyes widened with horror. They'll come for you with everything they have. Because if Seraphine's soul reunites fully, the curse she broke will be broken permanently. The Shadow Court will lose their greatest weapon against me. Behind them, small footsteps echoed on the stairs. They both spun around. Talia stood in the doorway, her small hand raised, touching the glowing runes. Where her fingers made contact, the symbols flared brilliant white. Talia, Alara rushed forward. How did you, the guards? They're sleeping, the child said simply, her voice strange, older, echoing with harmonics that didn't belong to a toddler. The walls called me. They wanted me to see. She stepped fully into the chamber, and the prophecy reformed, new words appearing. 2 shards united, 1 remains lost. Find the 3rd before all is cost. When 3 become 1 beneath the stone, the queen's true sacrifice shall be known. Kalitha's expression shifted from shock to something approaching wonder and fear. There's a 3rd fragment. Still out there. Still lost. Alara pulled Talia close, feeling the child's power humming beneath her skin. Where? But before anyone could answer, a deafening alarm shattered the silence. Bells rang throughout the citadel, warning bells, the kind that signaled invasion. Kalitha's head snapped toward the exit.
No.
They can't have found us this quickly. A guard appeared at the top of the stairs, blood streaming from a gash across his face. My lord, the Shadow Court breaches the outer wards. They're using ancient magic, the kind that predates the citadel itself. Kalith cursed in a language Alara didn't recognize. He turned to her, and for the first time, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. They're not just coming for you, he said. They're coming to destroy the tomb itself, to ensure Seraphine's soul can never be whole. He grabbed her hand, then Talia's. We need to leave. Now. But as they reached the stairs, the chamber behind them began to tremble. The white rose above the pedestal shattered, its petals dissolving into light, and from that light, a voice emerged.
Soft.
Familiar. Heartbreaking. Kalith. Alara, the 3rd piece. She's closer than you know. Look to the one who hates you most. Then silence. And the sound of shadows screaming as they poured into the catacombs like a flood of living darkness. The shadows didn't move like smoke. They moved like predators. They poured down the catacomb stairs in waves of writhing darkness, their forms constantly shifting, claws, wings, serpentine coils, faces that screamed silently before dissolving back into void. Kalith shoved Alara and Talia behind him, his hands erupting with crimson light. Get to the upper levels. Find Varen. Tell him to activate the blood seal. I'm not leaving you. Go. A shadow lunged. Kalith caught it mid-strike, his power incinerating it in a burst of flame. But 3 more replaced it, then 6, then a dozen. Alara grabbed Talia and ran. They burst from the chamber into the main catacomb corridor. Behind them, the sounds of battle echoed, Kalitha's roar of fury, the shriek of dying shadows, stone cracking under magical force. Mama, I'm scared. I know, baby. Just run. A wall of darkness materialized before them, solid as stone. Alara skidded to a halt, spinning around, but shadows had already sealed the corridor behind them too. They were trapped in a pocket of writhing night, the air growing so cold it burned her lungs. Talia screamed. From the darkness, figures emerged. Not shadow wraiths this time, but vampires, ancient ones, their eyes black as pitch, wearing robes marked with symbols that seemed to drink the light around them. The Shadow Court. The leader stepped forward, a woman with bone-white hair and a face like a porcelain doll, beautiful, lifeless, terrible. When she smiled, her fangs gleamed like daggers. Seraphine's little echo, she purred. We've waited 3 centuries for you to surface. Alara backed against the wall, clutching Talia. Stay away from us. Oh, we have no interest in the child. Not yet. The woman's smile widened. But you carry what should have stayed buried. She raised one hand, and the shadows struck. They wrapped around Alara like chains, wrenching her away from Talia. The child's screams tore through the corridor as Alara fought, thrashed, clawed, but shadow magic was absolute. It coiled tighter, crushing the air from her lungs. Mama! Talia, run. One of the shadow court vampires bent down, studying Talia with cold curiosity. Interesting. This one carries a fragment too. Shall we take both? No, the leader said. Leave the child. Let her run back to Caliph. Let him know we have what matters most. Please, Alara gasped, tears streaming down her face. Don't hurt her. Take me but leave her. We intend to. The woman's fingers traced Alara's cheek, cold as death. The child will serve a purpose later. But you're going to help us finish what we started 300 years ago. The shadows surged, swallowing Alara whole. The last thing she saw was Talia reaching for her, screaming her name. Then, darkness. Complete. Absolute. And visions. She was falling through memory, not her own, but Seraphine's. A throne room in chaos. Caliph collapsing, his skin cracking like porcelain, black veins spreading across his body. The curse eating him alive. There's no cure, a healer said, backing away in fear. The poison is soul deep. Even vampire regeneration cannot fight it. Seraphine knelt beside him, gripping his hand as he convulsed. Then I'll find one. I'll do whatever it takes. My queen, Caliph whispered, his voice breaking. Don't do anything foolish. Loving you was already foolish. She pressed a kiss to his forehead. Let me be foolish one more time. The vision shifted. Seraphine alone in a forbidden library, surrounded by texts bound in chains. Blood magic rituals. Soul-binding ceremonies. Fracture spells so dark they'd been erased from official histories. If I break the bond between our souls, she whispered to herself, the curse cannot follow the connection. It will have nothing to anchor to. Caliph will survive. And you. A shadow spoke from the corner. Not an enemy, but an advisor, an old friend. I'll scatter, Seraphine said calmly. But my essence won't die. It will find new vessels. And someday, when the threat has passed, the pieces might reunite. That's not resurrection. That's hope. Hope is all we have left. The final vision, Seraphine's death. Not an ambush, an execution. She'd known they were coming, had sensed the shadow court's approach. But she'd completed the ritual anyway, her soul already fracturing, white light erupting from her chest as the spell took hold. The assassin struck just as the magic peaked. Caliph arrived seconds too late, catching her as she fell. The light was still radiating from her body, pieces of her essence scattering like stars across the sky. What did you do? He screamed, cradling her. Seraphine, what did you do? Saved you, she whispered, blood on her lips. I saved you. The curse broke and you'll live. Not without you. You will. Her hand touched his face one last time. And someday, when the pieces find each other, tell them I chose this. Tell them it was worth it. Her eyes closed. And Caliph's scream shattered the heavens. Alara came back to consciousness, screaming Seraphine's final words. She was chained to a stone altar in a chamber that stank of blood and ancient magic. Shadow court members surrounded her, chanting in a language that hurt to hear. The bone-white woman leaned over her, smiling. Welcome back, little Echo. Did you enjoy the memories? That's what we're going to extract from you. Every piece of Seraphine's soul you carry, we're going to drain it, destroy it, ensure she can never reform. Caliph will kill you. Caliph couldn't save her the first time. What makes you think he can save you? The woman raised a ceremonial blade, its edge glowing with dark fire. Let's begin. In the citadel, Caliph fought his way through the last of the shadow barriers, his power burning so hot it melted stone. When he finally reached the corridor where he'd left Alara and Talia, he found only the child, huddled against the wall, sobbing, reaching for a mother who wasn't there. They took her, Talia whimpered. The bad people took Mama. Caliph froze. For a moment, one terrible, eternal moment, he was transported back 3 centuries to another corridor. Another woman was taken. Another failure. Then Talia grabbed his hand, her small fingers impossibly strong. You have to save her. Like you couldn't save the other one. Her eyes glowed white, Seraphine's essence burning through. This time, the child said in a voice layered with ancient echoes, you have to choose her. Choose the living. Or lose us both forever. Caliph collapsed to his knees, Talia's hand still in his. And for the first time in 300 years, the vampire king wept. Not for his dead queen, but for the woman he'd only just begun to care for, the stubborn, frightened, impossibly brave human who'd walked into his life and awakened something he'd thought buried forever. I'll find her, he whispered, his voice raw. I swear on my blood, on my throne, on Seraphine's memory. I will bring her back. He stood, power crackling around him like a storm. Varen appeared at the end of the corridor, covered in shadow blood, his expression grim. Caliph, they've breached the western vaults. We're losing ground. Recall every vampire loyal to me, Caliph commanded, his voice resonating with absolute authority. Activate the ancient wards. Burn every favor we're owed across the realm. What are you planning? Caliph's eyes blazed crimson, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of an oath written in blood and fury. I'm going to break every law our kind holds sacred. I'm going to use magic that hasn't been touched in a millennium. And I'm going to remind the Shadow Court why they once feared my name. He looked down at Talia, then back at Varen. Because I am not losing her the way I lost Seraphine. Even if it costs you your immortality. Caliph smiled. A terrible, beautiful thing. Especially then. The ritual chamber at the heart of the citadel had been sealed for 1,000 years. Caliph stood before its iron doors, their surface carved with warnings in 12 dead languages. All said the same thing. What lies beyond is forbidden. What lies beyond unmakes kings. My lord, please reconsider. The Caliph didn't look at Varen. Open the doors. The blood-binding ritual will cost you centuries. Perhaps millennia. Your immortality isn't infinite. I said open them. Varen exchanged glances with Morgan and Aldrich, who'd gathered behind him. All wore expressions of horror mixed with resignation. Finally, Aldrich stepped forward, placing his withered hand on the door. If you die from this, the realm falls into chaos. Civil war. Darkness we haven't seen since the first blood wars. Then don't let me die, Caliph said coldly. Help me survive long enough to bring her back. The old counselor's eyes glistened, something Caliph had never seen before. She must mean a great deal to you. She means everything. The words came out raw, unguarded. I cannot fail again. I will not watch another woman die because I was too weak, too slow, too bound by laws written by cowards. Aldrich bowed his head. Then we witness your choice, my king. And we will stand beside you, whatever comes. The doors opened with a groan of ancient mechanisms. The chamber beyond was circular, its floor carved with a spiral of symbols that pulsed with dark light. At its center stood a stone basin filled with liquid that looked like blood, but moved like smoke. Caliph stripped off his coat, rolling up his sleeves. His advisors filed in silently, taking positions around the circle. The ritual requires a blood offering, Morgan said quietly. Not just drops, Caliph. Leaders. Enough to forge a connection across realms. I know. And a soul anchor. You'll need to bind your essence to hers, permanently. If she dies while you're connected, you die with her. I know. Varen grabbed his arm. Then you know this is madness. You're risking everything for a woman you met days ago. Caliph's eyes blazed. I'm risking everything for a woman who carries the soul of someone I loved for centuries. Someone who sacrificed herself to save me. Someone whose death I've mourned every moment since. His voice broke. And yes, for a woman I've only known for days. But in those days, I've felt more alive than I have in 300 years.
So yes, Farron.
I know exactly what I'm doing. He stepped into the circle. The symbols flared, responding to his presence. Caliph drew a ceremonial blade from the altar, black metal, its edge singing with power. Without hesitation, he drew it across his palm, then his other palm, letting blood pour into the basin. The liquid inside began to writhe. I call upon the old magic, Caliph intoned, his voice resonating through the chamber. Blood of my blood, soul of my soul, I forge a chain across darkness and distance. I bind myself to Alara Voss, bearer of the lost queen's essence, and I will follow that binding to whatever hell she's been dragged to. The blood in the basin rose like a serpent, coiling through the air. I offer years of my immortality. Caliph, stop. Decades, centuries, if necessary. You'll age yourself into dust. To forge a path no shadow can hide, no magic can sever. The blood serpent struck, plunging into his chest. Caliph screamed. Pain like nothing he'd felt in millennia tore through him. His immortality, that infinite well of power and time, began to drain. He could feel it, years peeling away, centuries burning like paper in flame. His silver hair darkened at the roots. Lines appeared at the corners of his eyes. His hands, smooth for thousands of years, showed the first hints of age. But through the agony, he felt it. Her. Alara's presence, distant but unmistakable, like a star buried beneath layers of shadow. He could taste her fear, her pain, her desperate determination to survive. And beneath it all, Seraphine's echo, rising to protect the vessel that carried her. Found you, Caliph whispered. Then he collapsed. In the Shadow Court's lair, deep beneath ruined catacombs that predated the city itself, Alara hung suspended in chains of pure darkness. The bone-white woman circled her, the ceremonial blade gleaming. Any last words before we carve Seraphine's soul from your flesh? Alara's vision blurred. She'd been fighting for what felt like hours, fighting the visions they'd forced into her mind, fighting the cold that tried to shut down her body, fighting the despair that whispered she'd never see Talia again. But now, with the blade inches from her heart, something inside her shifted. A warmth bloomed in her chest. Not her own, someone else's. Ancient. Powerful.
Kind.
You are not me, Seraphine's voice echoed in her mind. You were never meant to be me. Then what am I? Alara whispered aloud. The part of me that chose life, that loved the dawn, the warmth of human laughter, the simple joy of existing. I was a queen who forgot how to live, but you, Alara, you've lived despite having nothing. You've loved despite being abandoned. You've fought despite every reason to surrender. Tears streamed down Alara's face. You are not my reincarnation. You are my redemption. Light erupted from Alara's chest, white, blazing, pure. The Shadow Court vampires shrieked, stumbling backward. The bone-white woman's blade shattered in her hand. Impossible. The fragment shouldn't have this much power. But Alara wasn't just a fragment anymore. Seraphine's echo had fully awakened, merging with her humanity, creating something neither woman had been alone. A soul forged from sacrifice and survival, ancient wisdom and mortal courage. The chains dissolved. Alara dropped to her feet, power crackling around her like lightning. You want Seraphine's soul? She said, her voice layered with harmonics that didn't belong to one woman but two. Come and take it. The Shadow Court attacked as one. Alara raised her hands, and light met darkness in an explosion that shook the foundations of the catacombs. She was losing. For every vampire she burned away, 3 more replaced them. The bone-white woman laughed, her power suffocating, ancient beyond measure. You cannot win, little echo. You're mortal, fragile, temporary. Alara's knees buckled. Blood ran from her nose. The power was consuming her from within, She hadn't been meant to channel this much of Seraphine's essence at once. The woman raised another blade, this one glowing with dark fire. Say goodbye. The catacomb wall exploded. Stone and shadow scattered like leaves in a hurricane. And through the dust and debris, a figure stepped forward. Silver hair now streaked with black, face lined with new age, but eyes burning with fury older than mountains. Caliph Draven. You, he said, his voice resonating with absolute authority, have made a grave mistake. The bone-white woman's smile faltered. Lord Draven, you've aged centuries for this mortal? How pathetic. The Caliph's power erupted, crimson light flooding the chamber. I've aged centuries, yes. And I'll age 1,000 more, if it means watching you burn. He moved like lightning, faster than even ancient vampires could track. The Shadow Court tried to rally, but Caliph tore through them like a storm through cobwebs, his rage given form and fury. The bone-white woman lunged for Alara, blade raised for a killing blow. Caliph appeared between them. The blade plunged into his chest. No, Alara screamed. But Caliph didn't fall. He gripped the woman's wrist, his blood-soaked hand crushing bone, and leaned close. You want to kill her? He whispered. You'll have to go through me. Literally. Then he smiled. Terrible, beautiful, final. And I swear, on every year I've just sacrificed, you won't survive the attempt. His power detonated, consuming the bone-white woman in flames that burned white-hot. Her scream echoed once. Then silence. The remaining Shadow Court vampires fled into the darkness. Caliph pulled the blade from his chest, tossing it aside. The wound was already healing, but slowly, too slowly. Evidence of how much his immortality had been compromised. He turned to Alara, who stood trembling, her power fading back to embers. You came, she whispered. I promised I would. He took a step toward her, then another, before his legs finally gave out. Alara caught him, both of them sinking to the blood-stained floor. You're hurt. Worth it, he murmured, his hand finding hers. You're alive. That's all that matters. Around them, the catacombs groaned, beginning to collapse. And as stone fell and darkness closed in, Caliph pulled Alara close and whispered the words he should have said centuries ago to Seraphine. I choose you. Not the throne. Not the realm.
You.
The catacombs shuddered, cracks spreading across ancient stone like spiderwebs. More Shadow Court vampires emerged from the darkness, not fleeing, but rallying. They surrounded Caliph and Alara, their eyes gleaming with malice. A male vampire with scarred features stepped forward, his voice dripping with mockery. How touching. The great vampire king, reduced to bleeding on the floor for a mortal woman. He laughed, the sound echoing off crumbling walls. You failed Seraphine 3 centuries ago, Draven. What makes you think you can save this one? Caliph tried to rise, his hand pressed against his slowly healing wound. I will die before I let you touch her. That, another Shadow Court member hissed, can be arranged. They moved as one, converging with supernatural speed. No! Alara screamed. Power exploded from her. Not her own, but Seraphine's, rising like a tidal wave of white flame. The vampires shrieked, thrown backward by the force. But Alara could feel it. This much power was destroying her mortal body from within. Blood ran from her eyes, her ears. Every cell screamed in agony. I can't hold it, she gasped. Caliph, I can't. His hand found hers, their fingers lacing together. Then we hold it together. Their powers merged, Alara's blazing white light and Caliph's crimson fire, two souls bound by blood magic and something deeper. Something neither could name, but both recognized. The Shadow Court leader snarled. You cannot break what was forged in ancient blood. The curse that bound you and Seraphine is eternal. Then we rewrite eternity, Caliph said. He pulled Alara closer, their foreheads touching, and spoke words in the old tongue, the language Seraphine had used for her soul-fracturing ritual. Alara understood them now, not through translation, but through memory. Together, they spoke the counterspell. What was broken in sacrifice, we heal in choice. What was scattered in fear, we gathered in courage. What was cursed in hatred, we cleanse in love, Alara whispered. The word detonated like a star-going supernova. White light erupted from both of them, flooding the catacombs, racing through every crack and crevice. It found the Shadow Court's curse, that ancient poison that had once consumed Caliph, and unmade it. 3 centuries of dark magic dissolved like mist under sunlight. The Shadow Court vampires screamed as their power source evaporated. Without the curse binding them, they were just ancient creatures suddenly vulnerable, suddenly mortal in ways they hadn't been for millennia. They scattered into shadow, fleeing into the depths. But the catacombs were collapsing now, the release of so much energy destabilizing foundations that had stood for thousands of years. Run! Caliph pulled Alara to her feet, and they ran. The stones fell like rain around them. The ceiling cracked, massive slabs crashing down. Alara stumbled, and Caliph swept her into his arms, moving with the last reserves of his supernatural speed, even as she could feel him weakening, his immortality burning away with every step. They burst through the final doorway just as the entrance collapsed behind them, a wall of dust and debris sealing the catacombs forever. They emerged into open air, a cliff overlooking Nocturne Vale, dawn just beginning to break on the horizon. Caliph took 3 more steps before his legs gave out completely. They collapsed together on the cold grass, both gasping, both bleeding, both impossibly alive. Caliph! Alara tried to check his wounds, but he caught her hand. "You're safe," he breathed. "That's all that matters. You're dying. You sacrificed too much. Worth it." His smile was soft, genuine, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Every century I gave up. Worth it." Around them, the sky lightened. Pink and gold touched the clouds. Caliph flinched from the coming sun, but Alara shielded him with her body, her shadow falling across his face. "I'm not letting you die," she said fiercely. "Not after everything. Not after," her voice broke. "Not after you chose me." His hand touched her cheek, thumb brushing away tears. Alara Voss. Stubborn, impossible, brilliant woman. "What am I going to do with you?" "Live," she whispered. "You're going to live. For me. For Talia. For yourself." In the distance, she heard voices, Varen calling out, searching for them. Calitha's eyes began to close. "Tell Talia. I tried. Tell her yourself." Alara gripped his hand tighter. "Stay with me. Please." And as dawn broke over Nocturne Vale, as the Citadel's guards finally found them, as Varen shouted orders for healers and blood and every ancient remedy they possessed, Caliph held on. For her. 3 days later, when Caliph could finally stand without assistance, they returned to the cemetery. Dawn was just breaking over Nocturne Vale, painting the fog in shades of rose and gold. The red lanterns still swayed from their iron hooks, but their light seemed softer now, welcoming rather than ominous. Alara walked beside Caliph, Talia holding both their hands, forming a chain between them. The child hummed softly, that ancient lullaby, and the cemetery seemed to listen, mist parting before them like a curtain. They stopped before Seraphine's grand stone crypt. Caliph stood silent for a long moment, his silver hair now permanently streaked with black, new lines etched around his eyes, evidence of the centuries he'd sacrificed. But his gaze was clear, unburdened in a way Alara had never seen before. Slowly, deliberately, he sank to his knees before the tomb. It was the first time in 300 years he'd knelt before the stone without rage or crushing despair. "Seraphine," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the silent graveyard. "I have spent centuries mourning you, centuries blaming myself for failing to save you. I built monuments to my guilt and called it love. Alara's throat tightened. But you didn't want to be mourned, Caliph continued. You wanted to be remembered. You shattered your soul, not in desperation, but in hope. Hope that the pieces would find their way to people who needed them. People who could finish what you began. He placed his palm flat against the cold stone. Your sacrifice lives on. In Alara, who carries your courage. In Talia, who carries your light. In me, his voice cracked. In me, who finally understands what you were trying to teach me. That love isn't holding on to what's lost. It's protecting what remains. Tears slipped down his cheeks, and he didn't wipe them away. Thank you, he whispered, for saving me, for loving me enough to let go, for believing that someday I'd find my way back to living. Alara knelt beside him, Talia settling into her lap. She'd brought flowers, white chrysanthemums, the same ones Caliph had carried that first night, and laid them gently at the base of the tomb. As her fingers touched the stone, warmth flooded through her. Not a vision this time, but a feeling, peace, approval, love that transcended death and time. She's happy, Alara whispered. I can feel it. She's at peace. Caliph turned to her, his red eyes searching her face.
And you?
Are you at peace with what you carry? Alara smiled through her tears. I'm not Seraphine. I never will be. I'm just me. A waitress from the outskirts who dreamed of queens and somehow ended up in a vampire palace. She laughed softly. But I think that's exactly who I was meant to be. Not a replacement. Just someone new. Someone extraordinary, Caliph said quietly. He reached out, hesitating only a moment before cupping her face in his hand. I have mourned a queen for 3 centuries. I have built my existence around a ghost. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. But I would choose you alive, stubborn, beautifully yourself, over any memory, any past, any throne. Even though I come with a toddler and 0 knowledge of vampire politics? His laugh was genuine, warm, utterly human despite what he was. Especially because of that. Talia, who'd been quietly playing with the flowers, suddenly looked up at Caliph with solemn eyes. Are you going to stay with us? She asked. Forever and ever? Caliph's breath caught. He looked from the child to Alara, then back to the tomb, at the past he was finally ready to honor by releasing, and the future that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. That depends, he said softly, meeting Alara's gaze. If you'll have me, knowing I'm ancient, complicated, and come with centuries of baggage, and a palace full of suspicious vampires. Alara's smile was radiant. I think we can handle it. Then yes, Caliph said, looking down at Talia. Forever and ever. The child beamed and threw her arms around his neck. As Caliph held Talia, one arm extending to pull Alara close, the red lanterns flickered. Once, twice, like a heartbeat, like approval from beyond the veil. Bats circled overhead, their wings catching the dawn light. The fog began to lift, revealing the city below, Nocturne Vale, ancient and eternal, bearing witness to this moment. A vampire king who'd learned to live again. A mortal woman who'd carried a queen's soul and made it her own. A child who held the light of hope in her small hands. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a rebirth of what could be. Alara leaned her head against Caliph's shoulder, feeling his heartbeat, slow, steady, ancient, against her cheek. What happens now? She whispered. Caliph pressed a kiss to her hair. Now? We write a new story. One where the ending isn't written in tragedy, but in choice. In courage. In love. Talia finished grinning. Caliph laughed, a sound that seemed to shake centuries of dust from his soul.
Yes.
In love. As the sun rose fully over Nocturne Vale Cemetery, warming the stones and chasing away the last of the night shadows, 3 figures stood before a queen's tomb, not to mourn, but to honor. And then, hand in hand, they walked back toward the palace.
Toward home. Toward tomorrow.
Together.